So the plate's ready to draw on after we've smoked it. It's cool, and yeah, now the fun bit starts, or I guess the quite daunting part when you have to make the first marks on the hard ground. First of all, before working on the plate, where we had the clamp or the pliers holding the plate there, we've got a little place on the plate that needs covering up before we start drawing. So I'm just going to do that with some liquid ground, which is quite useful stuff. I can actually draw back through this ground, so that's going to be really good. So I've just poured a little bit of the ground into a pot, and I'm just going to paint out that section. You can use stop out varnish for that if you don't have liquid ground. It's not so easy to draw back through, but you can usually work around that so that the drawing doesn't come to that point in the plate. Just to sort of introduce you to stop out varnish, that's really useful. You'll use it a lot when you're printmaking at any point when you want to prevent the plate from biting. So earlier on when we were talking about different times of biting in the acid, the way in which you stop the lines biting by putting the stop out varnish over the lines and then continuing to bite the rest of the plate. So that's something that you'll be using a lot of. I'm going to draw on the plate from some of these stones that I've picked up from the beach. So I'm just going to draw directly onto the plate. Some people like to make a tracing, and you can transfer a tracing down onto the surface of the plate. I don't often do that. I usually draw directly onto the plate. So I'm just going to choose one of these stones just so that I can show you really how I might sort of start working on the plate. So when you're drawing on the plate, you're using a sharp needle called an etching needle, usually a steel point, very sharp steel point, and they come in all sorts of different designs really, and also weights. So that's a very lightweight needle held in a handle, and this is a more heavy, it's actually a dry point needle. It's a heavy needle for dry point, but it's perfectly good for drawing on your plate with. And then a couple of other designs, and it's good to experiment with different ones because you do draw differently with the different tools. So the heavier one will make, you just held it differently in your hand, so it's quite nice to try out those different tools. Obviously once you start drawing, that's it really. You have to sort of keep going, and what I will do, I think, is I'll start drawing, and if I make any mistakes, I'm going to paint back in with the stop out varnish. So I'm not digging into the plate at all, just trying to establish where I want the drawing to go by quite lightly drawing into the ground. And where I have some marks that I might not want, I can stop those out before the plate goes in the acid. Or later on, I can scratch them out or scrape them out, which we talked about when we were looking at the print at the beginning of this series. So, like when you're drawing, lots of lovely drawings have the working marks, the plotting and the planning. Think about a Giacometti drawing, or Auerbach, or somebody like that, Frank Auerbach, where part of the drawing is the trace of the previous drawing, the thinking and the planning. And in etching, as we were describing when we were looking at the print at the beginning of this series, I can scrape out unwanted marks after etching and modify them. It feels a bit daunting, this part of drawing on the plate. You've gone to all the work of getting it ready to draw on, and you feel if it goes wrong that you've wasted a lot of time. So just like in drawing, when you cross hatching like this, where the where the marks come together into more dense cross-hatching, those are the lines that are going to print, and therefore I'm building up tone by cross-hatching. The really nice thing about etching is that it's a process in which you can build up the many layers. So where I want to modify the drawing, for example here I've just gone a little bit too low, I'm just going to put a little bit of the liquid ground, and then I can draw back into that. It's a good idea before putting it in the acid just to take your stop out varnish or liquid ground and just paint around the edge of the plate, because the metal is exposed at the edge and the acid will bite into the plate at the edges. Now you can not stop out the edges because you want a ragged bitten edge, and that's perfectly fine, but for most purposes usually best to just stop out the edge before putting it in the acid. So just run the brush round on its side. Try not to get too much varnish on the top. It might be that your drawing's quite close to the edge and you don't want to go over it. Okay, so that's got to dry, which takes 5 or 10 minutes, and then it can go over the acid.